if they can feel in that moment you're bonding with them, the bond itself triggers the oxytocin that reverses the dorsal shift. They go back to being flexible. The immediate effect is that their prefrontal, and to the extent they have one, and the whole upper cortex come fully back online. Now they can see things in a new way.
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to check out more at optimwork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass covering our entire theory of growth, daily recommendations for personalized advice, and a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at optimwork.com. Now let's start the episode. Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Optimal Work podcast, joined by Dr. Kevin Majeres. Kevin, good to be back here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, definitely. Kevin, I kind of had to have you back because, we just did the first episode on optimal parenting and we promised a whole series. So here we are back with episode number 2 in the series, and I had no choice but to have you back on to explain.
Well, then here we are, all ready to begin. And now we actually get into the substance of it, which is great.
And just to, I guess, give a brief recap, we had talked about, this is optimal parenting when your child is facing some kind of challenge, some kind of pain. And I suppose this applies, changing what needs to be changed to other relationships where you're in authority over children, like a teacher in some ways can apply these principles. And we talked about these 3 steps of connection, confidence, and consistency. And so now we want to dive into connection. So I don't know if you want to share any more by way of introduction, background.
No, we were talking also about how the main reason that children have to have parents is because they don't have a prefrontal cortex fully developed enough to be able to regulate what happens when they have like a dynorphin-driven storm of emotions. So and that's when parenting really comes out. If everyone is happy and on board and doing this things together, great. Doesn't require a lot of steering. But then how do you steer when there's a storm? And that's where you need to have, I think, the right approach to parenting. And what we're showing people in this series is what are the best researched approaches, or what would be the best research steps, sequential steps, to navigating difficult moments with children. But I think it applies to everything. I think the same things apply to, I think politics is parenting writ large. So everything in politics, actually, all the same parenting stuff applies. Not that we the people don't have prefrontal cortexes, but it's the same kind of relationship that we have with someone in authority. And in the end, are we driven by fears of of being authoritarian? Did we swerve into being permissive? Or is there a healthy middle ground? And what we're going to be showing people is definitely there's this healthy middle ground. And in parenting, you really just see it worked out, I think, so beautifully. So that's what I was hoping this series would show.
Yeah. I think it's so great, this idea, very Aristotelian, of that you have these 2 extremes, being too permissive, letting children do whatever they want, and then being too authoritarian, too rules-driven, too tough in some ways. And then in all of these areas, connection, confidence, consistency, those are all about, in different ways, finding middle grounds.
Exactly. And overall, the big picture, I always like to imagine it. I don't think Aristotle talks about the inverted U curve, but that's the way I like to imagine it. It's like an inverted U where the left bottom part is going to be the more permissive option, and the right bottom part is going to be the more authoritarian option. And then right at the peak in the middle, the top of that hill, you have the balanced, optimal approach. So that's overall how it works. And in fact, if you look into the in parenting, in the kind of the research into the psychology of parenting, there are 3 curvilinear relationships. And those are relationships where you have to have the right balance of characteristics in order to get the best outcomes. And those are actually connection, confidence, and consistency. So you can have too much or too little of both of those. And so the first one, though, for today is to go more deeply into connection.
Yeah. And so this relates to, we talked about the dynorphin dip and the dopamine rebound, and then that's where growth occurs. And maybe you can explain that a little bit more, that this, when you're experiencing challenge or pain, you get this surge of dynorphins, and that's when you really feel the difficulty. And then you need to get through that to get the dopamine rebound. And then that repeated process is growth over time. So this connection step is all about how do you help the kid through the dynorphin surge.
Yeah, exactly. And just like that, the one prototypical example of this dynorphin surge is when the alarm first goes off in the morning. I've always said that all of psychology is contained in that one moment, and this just has always proven even more true. But what happens is if people don't have the habit of getting right out of bed, when their alarm goes off, they experience this surge of dynorphins. It's unwillingness. For adults, they can think about like, ooh, I have to be responsible. I have to be reliable for my family. I have to get to a job on time. I can't get fired. So they have, but really they could do it from a sense of integrity. They could do it from a sense of wanting to grow in generosity, because they might be able to make really good use of that morning time, for important kinds of growth. The ideal allows the adult to get through the dip. They get through this dynorphin wave and they get out of bed, right when the alarm is to turn off the alarm, and they start about their day. What happens then is you get this subsequent dopamine bump. And the dopamine boost actually then raises their mood and energy and concentration for perhaps hours into the day. And the more people have these little challenges that they embrace, they get a dopamine bounce, and it just maintains higher and higher levels of good energy and mood. So that is what children cannot do on their own. So on their own, when they get a wave of dynorphins, they would tend to give in to it because they don't have yet a prefrontal cortex strong enough to stay online and to put the whole storm of dynorphins into some new context of growth, which then allows it to calm down. Adults have this ability, which is reframing, to shift the context into something wider and just staying in bed, that's not going to help me to be reliable and responsible, or to be temperate, or to be whatever the ideal is. So they're like, I'm just going to make sure that I get out of bed right away. It's going to be painful, but that's okay. And then it gets easier and easier and easier. And so that with children, though, they don't have that ability to shift the context. So to cause the dynorphins to start dampening. That's why they need an adult. And the crucial idea is that what reframing is for adults, the experience of the bond with a parent is for the child. The experience of the bond in the midst of some dynorphin surge is what reverses it, is what allows it to turn into a dopamine surge. So children can actually get the same boost of dopamine that adults get when they weather the storm of dynorphins, but they need the stabilizing feeling of the bond with the parent. They have to feel the bond when the dynorphins are high. So that's connection. That's the purpose of connecting.
Yeah, wonderful. So, it's interesting because when we talk about optimal work for kids, which was, one of the motivating questions for why we're doing this series in the first place, how do I introduce optimal work to my kids? Maybe a natural first step that maybe something was people had tried before was, teach them reframing mindfulness challenge. So then when a kid would experience some kind of challenge, you would then start to help them to reframe it in some way. Okay, can you see how this is an opportunity for growth, practice? And what you're saying is that's not really the best way to help kids adopt optimal work, is to help them. It's not to help them reframe in the moment of challenge, but it's to foster the bond, the connection in the moment of challenge.
That's exactly right. So reframing generally is, if you're communicating to someone else, reframing requires the use of language. The problem when a child, and I mean here really of any age, when a child is having a dynorphin-driven storm, So there's something they're deeply unwilling to experience. Let's say that they were playing a board game and they lost, and then now they're taking it really hard, and so they're melting down after losing a board game. So like, what do you do in that morning, in that exact moment? Trying to reason using words, or using words to put their loss into a broader context, probably isn't going to work. Like Marcus Aurelius is great for adults, but for kids, you cannot use like stoic reasoning to put their suffering into some like wider, cosmological context. So what kids need, because okay, why is this the case? A high level of dynorphins will directly counteract and shut down dopamine in the upper cortex. Their ability to even hear what the adult is saying is impeded by that. Children cannot listen well, they can't express themselves well, and they can't reason well at all when they're having a dynorphin storm because of the dopamine dampening effects. So dynorphins are the thing that the pain itself has to be the point of connection. And to do that, if you can find a way to let them feel the warmth and responsiveness of the bond, another chemical is released, oxytocin. And maybe some people don't like all being chemical, but I think it's very neat how it works. So I'll just get into it. Oxytocin will in fact hit receptors in their dorsal striatum, which is at the center of the dynorphin storm, and will turn it down. We've talked in the addiction episodes about the dorsal shift that occurs when people, could be with anxiety or addiction, get locked into a kind of tunnel vision. But that same phenomenon has happened in a tantrum or meltdown.
Mm-hmm. And they just repeat behaviors automatically.
Exactly. So what is driving all of that behavior is dopamine coming from the dorsal striatum. And that's what happens then. This is this loop where dynorphins are locking their attention. They can't reason about it. They can't think about it. They're going to be driven to do things about it, to try to, because the dynorphins are so aversive, they're going to try to make it stop somehow. It might be hitting their sister. It might be throwing something, they're going to try to do something to discharge that. So what they, if they can feel in that moment you're bonding with them, the bond itself triggers the oxytocin that reverses the dorsal shift. They go back to being flexible. The immediate effect is that their prefrontal, and to the extent they have one, and the whole upper cortex come fully back online. Now they can see things in a new way. Now they might be open to new rewards or new experiences, or maybe just new practices like congratulating the winner. Mm-hmm. So they're going to get this bounce of dopamine once the storm has subsided, and then you invest that by helping them to do the next good thing. So that's an important idea. Like talking in the midst of a dynorphin storm cannot work and will probably make it worse.
I can imagine especially this kind of authoritarian approach would also make it work of, telling the kid to, hey, be quiet, or, stop yelling, stop throwing a tantrum. Like that would just lock them even more into this, this shift, this dynorphin heavy shift.
Yeah, and so being anti-dynorphin doesn't actually help the child. If you're trying to shut down their dynorphins, and we'll get into how people do that, that doesn't help. Instead, you welcome the dynorphins they're having by warmly being responsive to their pain. We can get into, there's actually a lot of research on what triggers oxytocin release, and it's a very good guide for what to do in these moments. But this is not just if they're having a big meltdown. Like a common thing in families, like let's say that one child wants to watch Planet Earth and the others want to watch, what's Tiny World?
Star Wars.
Star Wars, yeah. I just think keeping it to like, total just nature, stuff. Then, so that's the child who, is disappointed that their family won't watch what they were wanting. You want that child to be kind of open to experiencing things that the others are interested in. Maybe even they'll come to like Tiny World even more. And so you want them to be open to it. You can't tell them to be open to it. It's easier to let the oxytocin lead the way and restore dopamine. Dopamine will make them flexible. So you're like, oh, I know how hard it is for you to let go of this. yeah, this, and you just admit that this is hard. We can get into actually like what are the proven ways of giving oxytocin. If you can give them the felt bond, they will calm down and they will be more redirectable than they would otherwise be.
Before we continue, a brief message. If you're benefiting from these discussions, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Doing so helps us to reach more people. So you're not just learning, you're also helping others to discover a path of growth and flourishing. Thanks for your support. Maybe we could dive into, okay, what are those qualities that trigger the oxytocin? And then also pair that with, because we talked a little bit about being too authoritarian, being too detached, and just, kind of telling, hey, get through it on your own. And then at the opposite extreme, we have this enmeshment where you identify too closely with the child's pain and you're just trying to problem solve them for it and not let them experience it at all. So maybe, just highlighting, okay, how do you trigger the oxytocin connect without going too extreme in the connection?
Yeah, and you'll see that everything that we'll talk about is actually mindful. So when we're talking about the warmth of the bond and trying to make that be felt, really that is the exercise of mindfulness with the child. You're using mindfulness to connect with their pain and with them. So, and it's that quality of warm, non-judgmental attention that so marks mindfulness that you're wanting to bring in those moments. And so you can think of this as warming them, moving them, and validating them. So warming them is actually, it means making eye contact, but you want your eyes not to be like, the avenging eyes of, wrath, but to be like, try to be like warmly making eye contact with them with soft vocal tones. And then if they're your own children, to be, hugging or touching them, like patting, rhythmic touching. Those all convey warmth. I don't think you can do that with other people's kids. So, but with your own children, you hug them, you touch them, you rhythmically touch them. That warming already will cause the release of oxytocin, whether they like it or not. You could say they might be mad, they might be kind of upset, but that is actually the first movement. Another is moving together. It's very interesting, but tandem movement will entrain them to you. And so that could be, if you're hugging them, it could be rocking together. It could be breathing together. Try to get your breathing in sync. It could be walking together a bit. Just go for a walk, and when you're walking, try to be in tandem with their little footsteps, if they're much smaller than you. But the tandem movement releases oxytocin and directly counteracts dynorphin storms and directly restores dopamine in the upper cortex. And the last then, and the most important really, is validating. And validating just means it's like a mindful kind of acknowledging the source of the pain, which is really the emotion. Dinorphins do not attach to situations, and they do not attach to thoughts. So it's not the situation that losing the board game, or it's not the thought like, oh, I never get to win. It's the feeling. The feeling is the sense of not being good at this game yet. And it hurts to be frustrated in this way. So yes, I know it's frustrating. Yes, I know that this hurts. Just so that it has to register with them. But the moment it registers with their brain, their pain threshold is going to radically change. So there are these great experiments of having people. If I had an ice bucket to give you, Sharif, I would give it to you, and I would have.
I wish I had one on hand. I should have been prepared.
Yes, I would have you put your hand, either one, into the ice bucket, and you want to be at around 32 degrees or 32, 34 degrees Fahrenheit. So super cold. And if you put your hand in there, after about 15 seconds, it's going to start to sting. That's the common. And what's interesting is, if I were to be validating your pain, just acknowledging how much it stings, you would likely keep your hand in that ice bucket twice as long as otherwise. But if I were to invalidate it, to make fun of you for, thinking of pulling your hand out, or to say, to be in any way being dismissive of it. You wimp, just offer it up. There are all these things that we can do to people that are actually invalidating. And so if I were to be invalidating, that would actually lower your pain threat tolerance. So validation can double pain tolerance. And this has been replicated in different settings, even in women giving birth, holding their husband's hand, that's validating, and the encouragement given there. And that really does substantially change their pain tolerance. So validation gives resilience in the face of dynorphins. So that's kind of the essence of being compassionate and connected, is that the child feels their pain is validated. What's interesting about that is validation does not mean rescuing them from the pain.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So when you say, so you're not reducing the pain, it's actually increasing their tolerance for
With
it.
the cold pressure test, which is what we call that ice bucket challenge, you just acknowledge the pain. You're not telling the person to bring their hand out of the bucket yet. And so the two ends of the spectrum that are kind of not connecting well are being, on the one hand, overly sensitive to the child's pain, where you overreact to it. And that leads to what's called enmeshment. With enmeshment, there are no real boundaries between the child and the parent. So when the child is in pain, the parent feels the pain. They're both unwilling to feel it. So the parent actually is unable to really validate the pain and be warm and responsive to the child who has it. Instead, they're anti-pain the same way the child is anti-pain. Now, the opposite of that is detached. So being a detached parent means that you're dismissive of the pain the child has. You don't really care about the child having pain. So those are the two extremes. Those both cause problems. In a way, they're both like anti-dynorphin strategies. Because the detached parent wishes they could lower their child's dynorphins by simply dismissing it, and it's not that bad. Or, the enmeshed parent will try to solve all pain, so that whenever the child has discomfort, they try to swoop in and solve it, and to somehow make it go away. And this is now especially the enmeshed style is very, very widespread now. And so now when teachers in schools have to discipline children, or like giving them some, not of course, I'm thinking of discipline, like giving them extra homework to do or calling them out for cheating.
Or detention or something.
Detention. Parents will come in to argue with it and to defend the children. That's like a very clear sign of enmeshment, I think. Not that in every case that's, it's always enmeshment, but that should be raising flags. That is it that the parent had over-identified with the child, wasn't able to actually reframe the whole situation to see how the child can be growing through this. So there's so much fear now of over-disciplining children. There are people who are very popular on YouTube who will say that even timeouts are bad. Timeouts being the gentlest form of discipline that, like, the Academy of Pediatricians in the US is all behind, and all developmental psychology seems to support. And you have self-proclaimed experts who are anti-timeouts, which doesn't make sense. Like, if there can be no discipline, what can you do? Now, we'll get to discipline later. I think that's a very distinct topic. But just to say that the enmeshed parent treats the child's pain as a problem for them, and the detached parent treats the child's pain as a problem for them. So in fact, both are not really being warm and validating of the child's pain in itself, in the child.
So it's so important to let the child experience the pain, help them to be tolerant of it, because to recognize that this is a time for them to grow. Because this is such an important thing in optimal work, that when we engage challenges, that we learn to reframe them, see them as opportunities for growth, the most difficult challenges in work and life. But sometimes it's hard to transfer that same mindset to other people, to your child.
Yeah, so the way that you transmit it then is by, first and foremost, not all pain is something that is actually threatening. So the parents have to be the one to make the decision. is this something that really needs solutioning? Or is this an opportunity for me to simply be with my child as they get through it? And so, for instance, if a child is very picky about eating, if you are going to, if you're serving something, and the child doesn't want to eat what you're serving, then what do you do with that? They have hunger. They're frustrated. There's nothing here to satisfy their hunger that they like. Is that a real threatening situation? Actually, no, it's not. And so the actually, I've had friends who a mutual friend of ours is telling me that his wife read Bringing Up Bebe, and so how American mother went to France and learned how French mothers get their children to eat, and it was liberating for them to see that, in fact, it's perfectly fine if a child occasionally goes to bed hungry because they didn't want to eat what the family was eating. But in France and in most cultures, it is not okay for children to demand short order cooking by their mother or father. So, to demand that they go back and make something new. So that's one of these things where you can actually be totally compassionate and understanding that you understand they don't like this. If you can connect with them in that moment, you raise the chances that the dynorphin storm will pass. They'll start to be flexible again with their dopamine. They'll start to be a little more adventurous and a little more willing. So you do that gradually by being willing for them to get through it, helping them to see that pain is not always bad. Sometimes it's just that we're not used to new things. And so it's natural that we have this reaction, but it's also natural for us to kind of get past it. And so really, compassion well done sets the stage perfectly for the next thing, which is confidence. That you are totally confident that they can be a bit more adventurous here with new foods and actually learn to like them would be an example of that.
That's great, Kevin. Yeah, and that takes us to basically a perfect segue into our next episode, which is going to have to wait another week.
Okay. Another week. Okay, well, we'll get back to it, picking up right there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin.
All right, thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out optimalwork.com, our unique platform that delivers content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond.